Next thing I know, I'm laying on a table. I'm like, here we go. And there's short little figures around me whom I'm not really looking at because I'm struck by this taller woman who's wearing a shiny white jumpsuit. She's very thin, and she's not fully human. She's mostly human looking. But she's got enormous blue eyes, very small features, really bright blonde, tightly curled hair, really pretty, and somewhat, not super nurturing, just very clinical. But looking down at me like, are you okay? I said, yes, I'm fine. And I tried to sit up, and they're like, no, don't sit up yet. We need to make sure you're okay. I'm like, I'm fine. I've done this before. I'm okay. I want to get up.
Welcome back. I'm here again with Preston Dennett. Preston, as always, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Sean. It's an honor.
Okay, I don't think this is... You've done elements of this before, but I don't think you've done an entire episode on your own experiences anywhere. So...
No, not really.
Yeah, you already look... Because you're one of the most humble people that I know. So I know this is hard for you. So I appreciate you doing this because I want people to know that. I want people to know that you're very humble and you're not, this was not your idea, right? This is my idea. Bringing you in, I'm dragging you in screaming and, kicking and screaming.
And I'm happy to do it. But yeah, it is a little hard, but no worries.
Yeah, I
have had experiences.
Let's go back and kind of build to that final experience that for folks who watch or listen to my radio show, you alluded to, but you didn't go into too much detail. But let's start with kind of from the first experiences that you may have had and then work our way up to that last really meaningful experience.
All right. Well, it's a fairly long story, and I've told some of this before, But, I got involved in this field as a skeptic. I was 21 years old, 1986, heard a report on the news. It kind of floored me. It was the JAL Airlines, Japanese commercial airliner, Captain Kenji Torochi, a very famous case, which reminded me that my brother, Mark, my older brother, had claimed to have seen a UFO some years earlier. So I approached him about it, and I'm like, Mark, describe this to me. Because before he did, and I didn't want to hear it, I was skeptical. So he described this incredible encounter with a metallic disc. Colored lights, a dome on top, silent, treetop level, chased it in his car with his two friends. And I'm like, wow, this is interesting. Okay. I know someone who's seen a UFO, and I know he's telling me the truth. He's my brother. It's not misperceiving. He was very close to it. Wasn't a hallucination. He had other witnesses. And that set me on a pathway of, investigating the subject. And later learned that my little sister Valerie had some encounters. And she actually had a missing time incident and didn't really tell me. Or she had a craft come over her, and next thing she knew, it was gone, and time had passed, and she completely forgot about it. She's like, this is why I didn't tell you, because I did not remember it. I'm like, okay. It still wasn't quite clicking into me that this is, personally involved with my own family. Because I'm interviewing people, and what we do know is that when someone's a contactee, it's generational, almost always. This is sort of the rule rather than the exception. If you're being taken on board a craft, if you're seeing ETs face to face, probably your parent has, or your uncle, or your aunt, or your grandparent, or somewhere within your family. This follows families. So I'm just interviewing people and learning about the subject and trying to wrap my head around it. Having never seen a UFO, it's one thing to interview someone and hear their story firsthand, but you don't know. It's only something you believe because you can't have experiential knowledge by just talking to someone.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
So, of course, found out my sister-in-laws both had encounters, one with little blue beings, the other with grays. And turned out 2 nephews. My other sister, her son, had a very close-up UFO sighting where it showed itself to him very intentionally when he was swimming in a pool in Hawthorne, California. During the day, this craft showed up, came up, looked at him for a good minute, and off it went. Whereas my other nephew, my sister-in-law, the one who saw grays.
By the way, when did that happen in Hawthorne, California? What year?
Oh, that would have been mid-1990s.
Okay, so SpaceX wasn't a thing yet, but SpaceX is was, I don't know if they've moved or not, was based in Hawthorne, California.
And those were their classic silver flying saucer, pretty much featureless. But so my sister-in-law who saw grays, her son, when he was just a kid, I'm talking maybe 6 or 7 years old, described this UFO, these blue lights that were hovering outside his window, way up high in the sky, but he saw it. And it was just a month or 2 later, or that same year, he described his whole room lighting up and a humanoid figure coming in. And I had to remind him of this because he kept, like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So I would continually this is what you told me. And he's like, oh yeah, I do remember this. He's now in his 30s. I talked to him recently. He's like, yeah, I still remember. And so it started to click on me very slowly, like this is in my family. And by the way, my brother Mark, following his encounter, he didn't notice this for some time, had some sort of implant in his arm. So this may have been more than just a sighting. And I've come to realize when someone has an encounter and it's within a couple 100 feet, this craft, the chances of deeper levels of contact go way, way up. So he could very well have been taken on board because he had this little thing you could palpate in the inside of his elbow, about a 1/2 inch long, sort of cylindrical. And I took him to the doctor. So I'm like, Mark, I know this UFO investigator. He's a medical doctor. He's a MUFON field investigator. Do you mind if I take him, you to him to just get a little consultation? And the doctor was very impressed. He's like, I want to x-ray this so bad. And Mark's like, no, I don't want to do it. And it disappeared. This little thing just disappeared one day. There's no entry wound. There's nothing. But the doctor felt certain this was a foreign object. So I don't know. There's that. So all these little data points kind of, so to speak, started to indicate to me that it is within my family. Now, when I found out UFOs were real, of course, the first thing I did was like, gosh, have I ever seen one? No, never really saw one. Started really digging into my past in a deep, deep way. And I will say that I do remember at around age 8 or 9, maybe 10, there's 6 kids in our family. You don't miss lunch because, food, while we had enough, was still very, very valuable. We were not rich people. And somehow I missed lunch and I was in the house. And they're like, we called you and you weren't there. And I'm like, what do you mean I wasn't there? I've not been outside all day. I missed lunch somehow. And it always puzzled me. And, I've looked back on that in sort of wonderment, like, could that have been UFO related? Got no other way to pin that down other than I know I would not have missed lunch and I know I didn't leave the house. So there's that. So little things like that. There's a few of those, but nothing I could really pin down. Like another one, my mom was a counselor. So we had all these books on psychology and medical books, right? And one day I'm looking through the book and there was a picture of an encephalitic child with a huge head and looking very much like a gray, right? Mm-hmm. And that picture struck me hard. I'm like, why does this look so familiar to me? This was well before grays had any publicity, but it looked like a gray to a certain extent. That was another thing that's just too small, too ambiguous. I don't know. But I remember being absolutely struck by it. And I'm also very into, astronomy suddenly, and science fiction and all these subjects, very philosophical and kind of a little bit of the black sheep of the family in that regard.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
But of course, then find out UFOs were real, and I'm like looking to see one. I want to see one. Because, Mark saw one, and all these people I know have had really amazing encounters, and this is not fair. I want to know if this is true. So I was interviewing people and really going out in the fields at night and driving around and looking to see something, and did. I remember driving through Topanga Canyon once, where I grew up. It was a very bright light in the sky. And I'm looking at it thinking, well, I'm not going to let this fool me, because it's going to turn and I'm going to see it's a plane that's coming towards me. Because I've been fooled before by that. But it winked out. Boom. Gone. So I'm like, well, okay. An anomalous light. So what?
Actually, I've asked Mick West what those sorts of things could be, because I don't, that doesn't happen to me often. It just looks like a star and then it winks out, right? Now, there are like 3 other things it could be. I'm not saying this was the case for you, but it would either be like a bolide traveling toward you over the horizon, goes away. It could also be the glint off of a distant satellite. And there's like one other thing that I can't think of. But that's happened to me on more than one occasion, where you just look up at the sky, you see something that looks like a star, and then it just winks out. Doesn't move, it just winks out. And I've seen it enough to ask that question. So and to this day, I have no idea what those things are, but I see them.
Yeah, I've seen a few of those too, and I'm not even
every several months, right?
I'm not even counting those, because I've seen satellites, I've watched them, and they'll even flare up a little bit. But no, this was 20 times the size of a star. I mean, this was big for full moon, kind of, and right, really bright.
That's different. That's different.
And it wasn't moving. I mean, this is not something that's moved. So that was the first real one that, like, But I remember this was like 1988. I went down to a UFO meeting in Santa Monica to hear a contactee speak. Andy Rice, R-E-I-S-S. Not sure how to pronounce that. At any rate, he's the contactee. He had his whole story. It was pretty interesting. He's like, I'm in contact with them telepathically. I'm going to try to call one down for you guys after the meeting. I'm like, sure you are. Because, finding out UFOs were real made me ultra skeptical of everything, because I had to reevaluate my whole belief system. It's fun. All right, let's do this. And there were 50 people at that meeting, and maybe 10 of us came out, 10 or 15 people after the meeting to see if he could call down a UFO. This is downtown Santa Monica. There's a park right next to the street, or the meeting place, and it's very trafficy. There's cars on each side. You look up, you can't see a single star. There's too much light pollution. I'm just kind of setting the scene here. And I'm like, okay. And we go up there, and he's like, let's get in a circle. Let's kind of meditate for a second. And I'm like, oh God, meditate? What are you talking about? Because I just wanted to see a UFO. I wasn't there to do woo-woo stuff, which is kind of the way I looked at it back then. But I'm like, fine, I'll do it. And so we meditated for a second. He's like, they're out there. I can feel them. They're coming. He says, I want you to look at this portion of the sky. And don't look away, because they're there. Keep looking, keep looking, keep looking. And he did this for 15, 20 seconds, less than a minute for sure, when an enormous, what it looked frankly like a shooting star. But it appeared exactly where he was pointing, because he was pointing at it. Look there, look there. And it appeared right where he said it would, and it went right down. And it was, for a shooting star, very bright. So again, ambiguous. I thought, I don't know. But that was cool. But then I had my first real experience in 1994. It turned out to be, let me think for it. No, 1992. Oh gosh, let me think for a second. Yeah. 1992 turned out to be the year that contact really started. And I started to question, I'm like, is this coming at me? Because I did a whole look at UFO researchers. And if you start researching the subject, it increases your chances of having contact. And this absolutely...
Or strange things start happening. Yeah. You start noticing.
Absolutely happened to me. So it's June. I pinned this down now, July 5th. This was during the middle of this Topanga Canyon UFO wave that I'm investigating. Which
isn't that when the Roswell crash happened? It was on a July 5th.
Yeah, I think that was back in 1947, of course.
Of course, yeah. I'm not implying. Was this in 1980?
I'm not that old.
You've aged like a fine wine, Preston.
This is 1992, just so we know.
Okay.
July 5th, 1992, I'm at my brother Mark's house, his wife Christy, my sister-in-law, and we're talking about UFOs because I'm losing my mind over all of this, even years into this subject. And I'm dealing with this huge investigation, and it's a lot. Because I'd contacted the police, I've got flyers up in the canyon, I'm cold calling people, I'm camping out. I really went all in with this investigation. And it got late. It was a Sunday night, and it was about 11:30, approaching midnight. Like, I got to go home. I've got to work. And I live 5 miles away, about in Canoga Park. They were in Woodland Hills, so again, Southern California. And I leave their house. It's a tiny little side street called Golondrina. And I'm winding around it, and I'm about 2 minutes away from their house, coming down a hairpin corner, which is quite steep. And you can only take it at maybe 5 miles an hour. And as I'm coming around the corner, I see what I initially thought was a bird swooping towards my car. Instantly discarded that because it's glowing and it's round. I'm thinking, whoa, is that a firecracker? It's swooping down at an angle, a parabola towards my car, and stops right in front of the windshield. And it's a little golf ball sized thing, slightly bigger. I'm like, okay, that's not a reflection either. Because you go through this whole theory escalation, like, what could this be? And it was an orb, and it was white, a little bit of yellowish, hard edges, not super bright, but definitely glowing internally. Stopped about as far away from me as I am from my computer, right over the hood of my car, right in front of my face. I mean, there's no doubt it's looking at me, and it's intelligently controlled. Because this thing goes to the left, sweeps past all the way to the right, sweeps back all the way to the left, and comes back, stops in front of my face again, darts forward, dips down, almost scrapes the road surface, the asphalt, goes straight up. I'm gripping my steering wheel. The car, of course, stopped, and I watch it go right up through the canopy of the trees to the zenith, and it's gone. And that's all I remember. In fact, I didn't remember it at all. It completely left my mind. I did not remember this. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember waking up the next morning thinking, I saw something. Nothing. It wasn't until later that year that I remembered this. And, I know this happened because I was there. And I've interviewed a bunch of people who've had what we would call missing time. And, have a UFO land in front of their car and not remember it. But that happened to me. So now I kind of understood what people were telling me. And that I do think I had missing time. This is when I started having dreams of being on board a craft, which was very vague and very dreamlike, but eventually, I think, became what I would call dream memories. Far different from your normal dream, which is very mercurial, very changeable, just bizarre, studied dreams up and down and sideways, because I do a lot of the astral projection stuff. And I really wanted to determine what's going on with me. But it was shortly after that. This was July. In August, we took a family vacation up to Crater Lake in Northern California, Oregon area.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. I took the family up there before. It's an interesting
the whole
place.
family was there. I mean, there's a lot of us. And me, Mark, and Christy, we're going to stay up late to see if we can call down UFOs. We got a big flashlight, right? And we're in an area that's forested with very, very high trees, the sequoias, And so you can see a tiny little circle of sky above you, and that's it. And it's late at night. It's past midnight. Everyone else is asleep. Campfires burned low. And Mark shouts out, I saw something. I saw, like, give me the flashlight. I saw something. And Christy and I are looking at him like, sure, okay. And he flashes this flashlight up. And we're all looking up. And darned if something didn't respond. It was about 5 times as bright as the brightest star in the sky. And it went whoosh and turned off. And it was fairly low. It's very hard to tell, impossible to tell. But it looked low. And we're like, flash it again, flash it again. So he flashes the flashlight twice. And darned if this thing in a slightly different position flashed twice. This wasn't a satellite. This isn't a balloon, a plane, helicopter, none of that. There's just no way that this could intelligently flash twice right after we did this. I mean, for me, the communication was obvious and undeniable, unequivocally, this is anomalous. And, I had trained myself to be a good observer. So I'm pretty sure that was it. Now, Christy's like, no, it happened a third time. I'm like, no, I think it would just flash twice. But it was certainly interesting. And we're like, wow, oh my God, that's weird. And we tried again and nothing happened. But it was, 2 weeks later, I come down to LA and Stephen Greer is coming to town to form CSETI, Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is all about making contact. Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, human initiated. I'm like, I'm not going. He's charging $300. That's outrageous. I'm not going to pay $300 to hear someone speak. And the newspaper calls me up. Says, I don't know why we're doing this. The editor, Colin Penno, he's like, I've never done this before, but we're going to pay your way if you'll write an article for the local newspaper. I'm like, you're kidding? Sure. Because I had written an article for them about UFOs in the Topanga Canyon area. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And he's like, he said it 5 times. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm like, I don't know either, but I'm not going to argue. So I did get to attend the lecture. And it was really cool because Stephen Greer was like, here's how you call down UFOs. Here's a case from Preston Dennett. I'm like, whoa. And he quoted 2 of my cases, his ideal methods of how to call down UFOs using lights, where I'd interviewed this gentleman who basically worked for NBC, set up a peacock's tail with computerized lights and attracted the UFO. I interviewed 2 of the guys involved with this incident, and there was another incident involving a argon laser where they called down UFOs. So that was cool to hear, him quote some of my research. He's like, after the meeting tonight, we're going to go up into the mountains here in Chatsworth and see if we can call down a UFO. I'm like, okay, this should be fun. Again, there were probably 100 people at that lecture, maybe 30 or 40 of us stayed up late, went to this location in the mountains above Chatsworth, and hiked to this. It's not a super remote location. There's no houses around, but you can see the entire San Fernando Valley with over 1 million people in it. We're just a few miles away. But yeah, remote in terms of 2 or 3 miles around us. There's no houses. So we go down this pathway and we get to this little plateau, which is just off a somewhat remote highway. And no sooner had we got there, I mean, literally, we had just walked up when someone shouted out, "What's that?" And we looked up and there was this blob of light moving across the sky, maybe 2 or 3 degrees, 5 degrees maybe, straight up to the zenith. Had to be 20,000 feet high. Again, impossible to tell for sure, but it was way the heck up there. And I knew enough about astronomy to know that this wasn't a satellite. It was far, far too big. This is the half size of a full moon. Big. And it's just unusual. And it winked out. I'm like, okay, here we go again. Next night, much less of us. There's maybe 15 people. So I'm in, I'm like, let's do this. And we were all meditating, our eyes closed, trying to call down a UFO. And I'm like, who's turning on their flashlight? This is so rude because I'm seeing flashes of light in my eyes. And the group is starting to murmur. And suddenly we're all opening our eyes. And these strobes are coming down on us from nowhere. It was unusual. But again, anomalous lights. So what? And we ended up going out for the next 5 years, every 2 months or so, staying up late, 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 and most of the time seeing nothing. Every now and then a light would flash. One time we were at the same exact location, and this was the best one we had. And nothing showed up, and we're packing up, and we're walking back to our cars when I saw a light like nobody's business on top of this mountain that I know is wilderness. It's called Rocky Peak. I've been there. You can't really get to it that easily. You'd have to go straight through the brush. There is a fire break that leads up to that general area, but this is the peak. I'm like, guys, did you see that? Stop. And so we're all stopping, we're pulling on our flashlights, and we flash at it, and it flashes back. We flash twice, it flashes twice. We flash 3 times, it flashes 3 times. We go once, and so it's going back and forth. And I'm looking at it thinking, well, this is a white light. It's very bright, but there could be someone on top of that mountain. This is on the ground. I'm just not convinced that this is ET, because you have to be that way, If it's possible it's human, it's possible it's human. And this is what I'm thinking. I'm like, well, I'm getting impatient with this. This is stupid. We're probably talking to some campers up there, and they're just, joking around with us. Even though I kind of knew that probably wasn't the case, it could have been. And this is what I'm thinking. I'm like, let's get on with this. I'm going home. It's late. It's like 2 or 3 a.m. at this point. And that's when something happened that I knew that this could not have been a person, because this light flashed back blood red and the size of, the full moon, I guess, would be, and just the kind of prismatic light that you can't, I don't know how you could produce that. Certainly not with a flashlight and a filter. It was really bright. And we all went, oh my God. So I'm like, all right, that was the best one. And we ended up disbanding at some point because it's a lot of work. But my point is, I'm sort of circling around the phenomena, getting closer and closer, and having these little incidents happen. Another incident happened when I went to see Stephen Greer again in Wickenburg, Arizona. And this is weird because, I had a good friend who was there. I knew a guy from this LA group was there. Stephen Greer was there. It's daytime. And this light starts flying up overhead. And someone points it out, and we're all looking at it, and Stephen Greer's like, well, let's just call this an anomalous light. It could be a plane. It didn't look like a plane because it's a circle of white light. And I'm looking at it as he's talking, and everyone's just kind of looking at him. I'm like looking at this light because I'm trying to figure out what it is. And some people are looking up at it as well. And then suddenly this darn thing flashes a huge bright red, enormous, same prismatic red, and disappears. And everyone goes, oh my God, whoa, and the whole ripples right through the group. And that was it. Everyone stopped, looked back down. He kept talking. I'm like, well, wait a second. Are we not going to talk about this? And, I don't know why I didn't speak up, but I didn't. And, I kept, thinking about it. And finally I called up John, who was there, my friend. I'm like, do you remember that? And he's like, no, what are you talking about? When we were all sitting there, and, this is when the rabbit went right hopping through the group. And he's like, oh yeah, I remember the rabbit. And I'm like, don't remember this big red light. It's like, no, I don't. So I called up Joe, another guy who was there. He's an emergency physician. He's an intelligent guy. Nope, didn't remember it. So I'm like, well, I'm sticking to my story because I remember this. Weird, right? It's just a little weird. I'm like, okay, whatever. So, and little things like this would happen. I'd be interviewing a contactee, and I'm like, did you go on TV? And I'm like, sure. 2 days before the interview, she calls up, can't do it. The ETs came. They know about this. They said it's not time. I'm like, well, okay, they're paying attention. They know about you. They must know about me. I'd interviewed this one lady who was having major contact, hybrid babies, the whole deal, healings, full on case of contact. And she described how she had this incident where she woke up with grays around her bed. And she jumped up and she kicked one of them and snapped its neck. And that's when she kind of overcame her fear and moved towards much more positive contact. But back then, no, she was not a happy camper. And I'm like,
what did the Greys do when she killed one of them?
They stepped back, scooped up their fallen comrade, and moved through the wall. So she's describing this to me, right? I'm doing a recorded interview. All my interviews are recorded. And this is mid-1994, late at night, and I'm transcribing the interview. And I get to that part, right? I'm like, okay, this lady, she's very nice. Nice lady, right? I'm sure she's sincere, too. You know, she's got witnesses to support her story. I talked to, her roommate, her son, and so forth, a friend. So I think she's telling the truth, but this is a lot. I'm still somewhat new to this subject. This is, 1994. I'm 5-6 years in. But I'm having a hard time with this. I'm not sure if this is true, because I've never heard of something like this. Travis Walton socked one of the beings. And I've since heard of other cases just like this, but back then, no, I hadn't. So I'm questioning her story. And I'm leaning back in my chair thinking, I think she's telling the truth. It's she believes it to be, but I'm not so sure what to think of this. And that's when I got a very strong, irresistible impulse to go onto the roof of my condo. This is a 3-story condo in Canoga Park. Now, I wear glasses to drive, right? Not legally, I don't, but, sometimes at night it's hard to drive and see the signs. My glasses are down in my car, my eyeglasses. So for some reason, I jump out of my chair, and this is near midnight, right? Go down 3 stories with my keys, because this is a secure building, get the glasses out of my car, run up, go onto the roof of the condo where you're not allowed to go. And I'm a good boy. I don't disobey the rules. I've been up there, but, I don't go up there and traipse around. It's rude. So I open the door to the roof, and there's a little house kind of that protrudes up from the roof, and I walk around the door and I lean back against the wall there. I'm like, what am I doing? I've got my glasses on. I'm like, this is insane. Why am I up here? When boom, a UFO appears. I'll call it a UFO. It's a bright orange oval light. Fairly large. I'm going to guess maybe 10 or 20 feet across, right across the street, 300 feet away maybe. I have a tiny little parking lot, the LA River, and another side street, and an apartment building. And it was right above that. And I'm looking at it thinking, what the heck? When I get a message, and it's telepathic, and it's not words so much as just an instant message, like, it's us. We're Wendy's. That's not her name, but that's the name of it. We're Wendy's ETs. This is us. She's telling the truth. If you don't believe, watch this. And again, not in words, but it was just this sort of like, we're real, here we are, watch. And this darn thing, which initially was sort of right there, not moving, went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and started zigzagging down to below treetop level. There were palm trees there. And I'm like, whoa. And it was approaching this apartment building and winked out. I'm like, holy smokes. I got a message from that. That was new to me. I'd never, ever had anything like that. I ended up calling her the next day. I'm like, you're not going to believe this. I think I saw your ETs. She's like, wow, that's amazing. I told you I was telling the truth. I'm like, yeah, I know you are. I think you are, but that's what happened. I'm like, man, you say you're in contact. Can you call them down? It's like, well, I can try. I'm like, because I'd love to see them again. She's like, well, you just saw them. I'm like, yeah, but I wasn't ready. And so she's like, well, I'll try. And she calls me up. She's like, okay, they agreed to make a display for you. I'm like, okay. And so we go to the assigned place at the assigned time, which is off the 210 freeway in Pasadena. She she parks off the side of the freeway. I'm like, Wendy, this is illegal. You know, we can't really park here on the freeway. She's like, well, this is where they said to go. I'm like, okay, fine. I had brought along my sister-in-law, Christy, and my nephew, her son, James. He's 14, maybe 13. And all four of us park off the freeway and hike up this little fire break to this small mountain, a large hill. And Christy and James fell behind a couple of 100 yards, and me and Wendy reached the plateau, and she's like, this is where they said to go. I'm like, okay. And I'm just getting myself oriented and kind of looking around when she screams, grabs me by the shoulders and spins me around. And 50 feet away from us, and maybe 30, 20 feet off the ground, is a enormous spherical object. And I say object, but it was really just a glowing light that you couldn't see through it, but it was scintillating, and it was really beautiful. I mean, absolutely exquisitely beautiful, because it has these 1,000 points of golden light. It's kind of how it looked. It's, you know, kind of like a dandelion, a dandelion puff, but imagine that, but golden light. So it was unbelievably beautiful and very close and totally silent and kind of just hovering there. And we're just awestruck and breathless and jumping up and down. And look, you know, we didn't even look at each other. You couldn't take your eyes off of it. I had a camera, didn't think of it. And it was there for maybe 10 to 20 seconds and started to drift slowly away. No messages, nothing like that. And then as it moved maybe 10, 30 feet, it zipped so fast around the far edge of the mountain there, probably 3-4 miles in less than a second, leaving a tracer, in your eyes at least, of golden light, and was gone. I remember seeing it as a tiny little thing, and then boom, it's gone. She looks at me like, oh my God, you said. We were absolutely awestruck. And of course, Christy and James come up at that point, and they're like, what? And we're like, so that was a really cool sighting. Very cool. And one of my best. But I started interviewing a lot of contactees, and every now, because they would come over, like, I can show you UFOs. I'm like, okay, come on over. And some were mentally ill, flat out, like, look, there it is. I'm like, okay, I'll see you later, because there was nothing there. But one guy I interviewed, a genuine contactee, I'm still in contact with him, had taken some really good footage of UFOs, which got on the television program Sightings. And he had this method that he sort of invented to see UFOs that are sort of always there, but you can't see them because they're sort of cloaked. And his method was, and I'm going to be very careful about recommending this, because what it involves is looking in the corona of the sun by basically blocking out the sun's disk with some object and then looking in the corona where there's very high light levels. Whitley Strieber interviewed him, put him in his book, The Best Evidence. So he's like, this is a method I invented. You can actually see stuff. Go try this. And so we tried it, and I'm like, well, those are dust balls, and these are insects. This is what I'm seeing. Because you would see these little things zipping around, and I'm like, well, you can't tell how far away or how big these are. I'm not impressed. But I kept at it. So one day I was at work, and I'm like, you know what? It's my lunch hour, high noon. I'm going to step out and block the disk of the sun with the eave of the building here. This is in Canoga Park, very near my condo. And use, sunglasses as well, polarized sunglasses. So I'm doing this, and I'm seeing these little flecks and things, and I'm like, all right. Then suddenly I see something that is a triangular-ish, kind of V-shaped craft with a disc on the front, a disc on either apex, metallic gray. Suddenly, how will I say it materializes at about 45-degree angle. I see it perfectly. It's huge. It's bigger than the building. Could not be more than a few thousand feet up. There's just no way. This looked close. It was metallic gray. Goes off, more degrees until it reaches about a 45-degree angle and disappears. I quickly drew it, and I'm like, well, I saw that. That was a craft. That was really the only solid craft I've ever seen. But it was something. I don't know what to think of it to this day. I told him, he's like, well, I'm telling you, this works. I'm like, yeah, I guess it does, because I don't know what the heck that was. And I almost backpedaled a little bit in my own mind because it's hard to understand what you're seeing when you're seeing something that massive. And it was very brief, but again, I'm sticking to it because I know what I saw. So these are the sort of things that keep happening. Wendy, by the way, she said, the ETs told me to come to you. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. So
that happens a lot, though, with you, right? That happens a lot.
Well, it would happen later in a very dramatic way, a couple of times. Yeah. I mean, one time I was interviewing a gentleman, a Marine. He's got a crazy story. I think he was totally my lab, actually, but an honest-to-God contactee as well. But after I hung up with him, he called me. I think it was the next day. It may have been immediately. He's like, I just need to let you know that while we were on the phone, after we hung up, my 4-year-old kid came running and said, Daddy, a star landed in the street. He's like, what are you talking about? Big bright light, Daddy, right there, while we were on the phone. So this is another weird, I wonder what's going on here. So and meanwhile, I'm having more UFO dream, right? Because I had a missing time incident. And I'll get to these dreams in just a second. But let me just give you one more sighting, which was really cool. Because this is right after I had this triangular sighting. Like Christy, this guy, John Bro, he's for real. I saw this triangular thing or this V-shaped thing. Because it had a big indentation. It wasn't really a straight triangle by any means. So we went over to her house in Chatsworth, her apartment. And we were just out there looking at the sky, and there was a little section where you could block the sun, but wasn't really feasible. And the neighborhood kids came out and were like, what are you looking at? And I'm like, oh, we're looking for UFOs. And darned if one didn't show up. And it was hard to see because it was almost the same color of the sky. It almost looked like glass, honestly, but you could distinctly see the same exact kind of boomerang shaped, might be the best way of putting it, or V-shaped. And it scooted across the sky all the way across. And I watched it, and I'm watching them track it too. And the kids are going, oh my God. These are little kids, 7 to 12 years old. They're jumping up and down, and Mark and Christy are there. And I'm like, oh my God, So we saw that. She drew it, my sister-in-law. So I have the drawing, and it's absolutely accurate what we saw. So these are, I'm like seeing UFOs. And this continued throughout the decades. I would see, anomalous lights mostly. But started having these dreams, because I'm trying to remember the missing time incident, right? And the one that I think might pertain to that is this dream I had, which is, I think, an honest-to-God memory. And I'm going to say, yes, this is a dream, but in my estimation, this is a valid memory of I find myself in this room that is an enormous stadium type room with 20 or 30 other people, all young men. I'm young. I've got my hair. So I remember this, probably 10, 20 years after it happened, right? I'm young in this dream. And we're all standing at little tables that are dotted throughout the room, being given a lesson on free energy devices or electromagnetic and machines. And we each had our table, and we were paired up, men only. And I remember looking under the table to see if there was wires or anything, nothing. I remember looking at this device, which was very small, like a shoebox, a bread box type thing, gray metallic. And there was guides that I did not get to see, but they were tall, right?
By the way, just to intercede really quickly, this shoebox type device that you mentioned, free energy device, This is something that Stefan Schwartz's remote viewers, or just normal people, he had normal people kind of look out to see what they could see beyond 2040. And they all saw these devices in their homes that had no wires, that were powering their homes, basically. The other thing is Lynn Buchanan has been fascinated by these devices. Lynn Buchanan, the remote viewer that worked for the Department of Defense as in their remote viewing program. There are numerous accounts. If you look at like ancient Sumerian tablets, you'll see people holding like these look like purses or whatever, but like the solid black. There's the Utsubune Japanese UFOs that were, there's like pictures of this. And there's a woman with one of these devices coming out of the UFO. So again, and it's speculated to be this sort of a free energy device. Same with Coral Castle, the guy in Florida who no one could figure out how he's moving these massive tons of, but there's one of his pictures, there's one of these, there's like this gray metallic object somewhere in the photo. So, I mean, it could just be a toolkit, who knows, but
well, Dolly Saffron has a lot to say about this.
This is not an unusual reference, is all I'm saying. Like this tracks with a lot in completely disparate fields and descriptions. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue with the story.
No, it's fine. It's interesting. But, this was not a normal dream by any means. Right? This was very coherent. And what really impressed me, because, I'm not understanding and I'm not remembering exactly all the communication, and I'm not seeing who the guys are that are sort of leading the lesson. All I know is they're very tall. And I'm quite young, and these are all, young men, which I thought was odd. We're all paired up. And finally, like, the lesson's over. Come to the side of the room here. This is a very large gymnasium-sized room. And we all gather to the side, and they turn the side transparent, and we step out on this little balcony type deal, and you can see the Milky Way. Now, I'm sure you've seen pictures of the Milky Way. You can go out into the desert and see stars like nobody's business. And it does not compare to what I saw. It was absolutely breathtaking to see this field of stars, the Milky Way, in all its glory, in a way that was far more high definition, far more vivid, you could reach out and touch it kind of feeling. I mean, I can't describe it. The words are not doing it justice. It was awe-inspiring. And just to see that made me like realize this is real. This is absolutely 100% real. Because there's just no way I could have imagined how unbelievably clear this is. And having interviewed so many people who were like, oh yeah, they turned the wall transparent and you could see the field of stars and it was so beautiful. I'm like, well, here we go. This is it. So that was one. Another really cool dream was this 8-foot tall guy in this robe shows up and he's teaching people all these lessons and he's guiding me through this room. And this was quite brief, but I'm like looking up at this guy and he's exuding wisdom and kindness, but he's quite stern. And,
was he like a tall, was he a gray? Was he a human?
I looked at his face and I could not see his face. It blurred out. Mm-hmm. Something I've heard from other people who are like, every time I looked at his face, it would be just a blur. And so that was what was happening to me. I'm like, how am I going to recognize you? How will I know this is you if I see you again? He says, you'll know because you'll have to look up to me. I don't know what exactly that means, if that's, physically looking up or, gosh, I look up to you, you're a great, but that's what he said. I'm like, okay. And that was just a brief thing. But then, and this was so cool, I have this dream where I'm entering into a room and I'm instantly of the feeling like this is a visitation. Be respectful. You're getting an opportunity here. And so I walk into this room and it's a very small room with gray walls, which are straight, but they curve into the floor. And they have this sort of texture like tinfoil, the dull side of tinfoil. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is exactly what people are describing to me, but this is not quite what I expected. Because people always say rounded walls, and I'm thinking, an egg. No, these were flat walls that curved into this floor and curved into the ceiling. Metallic. There was a table in the center. Someone was sitting there. I couldn't see who they were. And I walked up to them, and this same guy shows up. And this time I see him more clearly. He's wearing a white jumpsuit. He's so skinny, very thin, very long arms, long neck. And again, can't see his face. And I'm very respectful. You know, I've got my arms sort of behind my back, but I won't touch anything because I want to be respectful. And he's like, would you like to see the other room? I said, sure. And he led me to this other room through a sort of arched doorway. And it was a very small room. And he said, look in the corner. So I looked in the corner, and he turned it transparent. And that was really cool. And we were underwater. We were absolutely under the ocean, because I could see the water and not a whole lot else. But I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. He's like, would you like to see the engine? Or I think something along those lines. It wasn't words so much as like, look over here. You know, this is the power source. So I walked over to the other side of the room, and I had some trouble focusing on this as well, but it looked like an old style furnace with slats going down horizontally, but, you know, in a tall, slender column with slats going down. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And that was basically it. So another one of these, have I been on board? So this is what I'm remembering. These are dreams. And it's frustrating because you're like, okay, well, any skeptic would say, you're just dreaming. You know, and me, it's my experience, so I know that how I feel about it. But it's still, you know, not a full conscious experience. So meanwhile, I'm still seeing, you know, lights every now and then, because I'm writing a lot of books, right? And sometimes I take a break, and I'll get this message like, you're supposed to write, you're supposed to write. I'm like, this is kind of odd. And so I'll write a book, and then I'll get it published. I'm like, I published a book. And I'll go out and something will appear. I'm like, and I get a little kind of thank you message. And it's an anomalous light. That's happened 3 or 4 times. This was fairly recent, 2021. I went out in my backyard. I'm like, are you guys up there? This earthworm is angry. I want to see you guys. What the heck? And a light flashed on, stayed there, flashed off. Again, far, far bigger than a star. Way the heck up there, but appeared right where I was looking. So that was actually really cool. I had another one just like that, a light on the horizon, blinked off. I'm like, that's not good enough. What the hell is that? You know, anybody could see that. That's rude, frankly, is what I'm thinking. If you're going to show yourself, show yourself. You can do a heck of a lot better than that. How advanced are you? So I'm giving them the whole riot act when this owl flies right low over my head. A huge owl. And that was kind of cool. It was the whole owl connection. But of course, this is all ramping up. I interviewed Dolly Safran, right, for my book Symmetry. She reaches out to me and later tells me, you know what? The reason I contacted you is because the ETs gave me your name. Flat out, here's the guy you need to look at, because she couldn't find a good researcher. They're like, here's his name, write it down, check him out. He might be a good fit. She told me this later. I'm like, oh God, here we go again. That's cool. Because it was not long after that, I had a guy from England called me up out of the blue. And he's like, are you Preston Dennett? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I have this experience, and you know, they took me on board and they were warning me about nuclear proliferation, and they said, we're up for some real tough times ahead. And have you heard of this kind of thing? I'm like, yes, this is one of the common messages they give, you know, and I answered a lot of his questions, kind of counseled him through some of his experiences for about an hour. And he's like, okay, thank you. You really helped. I really appreciate you talking to me. One more thing before I hang up. I want you to know that this encounter happened this morning. I'm like, oh, wow, it's amazing. He's like, they told me, these were Greys, he said. They told me to call you. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, they gave me your name. I didn't know you. I certainly don't know him. This is in England. And he's like, yeah, they told me to call you. I'm like, wow. So I started to really get a sense like, they do know about me. And here's the 3rd time this has happened. So I interviewed Dolly Safran, and we're talking back and forth, and I go to meet her face to face at UFOCon in 2021 June, I think it was. It's the UFO MegaCon in Laughlin. And she rented this Airbnb. Now I'm doing coast to coast the night before, so I can't be there on the night that she's arriving. But she's there with her friend Yvonne. When the UFOs show up, she films them. It gets on the evening news, which I did see. And I'm there the next night, and we stayed there almost a week. We were followed, no doubt followed, 100%, because this car followed us to our Airbnb from the con, which was way off on several side streets, and parked in front of our driveway, blocking the driveway. I mean, it was unbelievably, like, what in your face, following us. But one night she's like, let's go out and, let's see if we can see something. And sure enough, there was something up there, and it was sort of this big purple splotch. She's like, that's a mothership. I'm like, okay. I wasn't super impressed, honestly, because I'm looking for something a little more.
Right.
But it was interesting, right? And I saw some other anomalous lights, but it was cool. Because, she had gotten really good footage. Like, but where's that? That's what I want to see. But it was interesting nevertheless. So, meanwhile, I'm still having dreams. I'm on board a UFO holding babies sometimes, or seeing a baby that's not entirely human. And these are a room that's completely white. People are dressed up in white. It's very clean. This baby's on the floor, and it's this big. I'm like, can I hold it? And they're like, no, you can't hold this one. I'm looking very closely at it, and it's partly human, but partly not. The other was like, here, you can hold the baby. And it's really interesting because, I love babies. Anyway, who doesn't? But you hear so many accounts of people going through this sort of experience. Hold the baby, it needs love, this sort of thing. And again, these are dreams. So it's a bit frustrating because I feel like at this point I'm probably a contactee. There was another time, if I can backtrack a little bit, where I'm driving back from San Diego after visiting a friend late at night. This is the 405 freeway, which is one of the worst freeways in the world. If you get caught in traffic, you will be on there for the rest of the day. So I travel it late at night because it's still trafficy, but you can at least move. And there's cars all around me, and we're all speeding at over 65, probably 70. And it's a cloudy night with a low cloud cover of a few hundred feet, a low layer of clouds. And I know this road very well. I've done this 100 times. And I see this giant light over the freeway. I'm like, look at that, because it's not a street light. It's far too big. And it's not a building or a bridge. There's nothing there. I've been here before, and I know this road. So I'm looking at it thinking, well, that's odd. Well, what could this possibly be? It's not a helicopter. It's an enormous globe of light, about 200 feet up, maybe 100. I'm getting closer and closer, and I'm gripping my steering wheel, and I'm looking up at it. I didn't pull over. This is a dangerous freeway. LA traffic, you've got to be very careful or you'll die. So I regret not pulling over, but I didn't because the traffic is on all around me. Cars are on every side. But I'm slowing down because the closer I get it, the more I realize this is unusual. And I'm getting right under this thing and no, there's nothing connected to it. It's low enough where I can see there's nothing connected. And it's darn huge. It's a house. Perfectly round, gold. Well, no, it was white, yellow, more towards white. And I'm like, wow. And I'm looking up and as it gets right there, right in front of me, I get a message. And it's very personal. And it's not, don't use nuclear power or anything like that. It's your niece has just been born. No, this is my sister-in-law who saw the grays, the son who saw the humanoid, and so forth. So, it's her side of the family that's probably connected to this. But I'm like, oh my gosh, because, I hadn't even been thinking of that. I did not know the due date. I knew she was pregnant. I knew she was getting along. But I'm like, wow. If I get home and I find out that, June 14th, was it June 14th? I forget. It was the exact date. I should know my niece's birthday. June 9th. July 9th? Now I'm second guessing myself. But at any rate, I get home and sure enough, yeah, she had been born. So that was cool. And, my sister-in-law and my little sister, of course, had sightings as well. I'm like, why didn't you call me? She's like, I didn't want to wake you up in the middle of the night, and sound like a scared lady. Valerie, call me next time. So it was definitely circling around in my family. So now I'll get to the major incident. Undeniable, I'd been taken on board, fully conscious. And I will...
When did this happen?
This next one?
Yeah.
This happened on my birthday, May 6th, 2022. Best birthday present I ever had. And I suspect that was intentional.
And what time of day?
This was in the middle of the night. I'm sleeping, right? I am in bed sleeping, and I'm dreaming, actually. I'm dreaming. And suddenly, in my dream, I see a massive UFO. I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, this looks like those CGI UFOs with all the little doodads on it, and it's massive, and it's clearly not a real UFO. This is just a dream, right? And all of a sudden, I'm not in this dream anymore. I am being pulled up what Dolly Saffron calls an energy ribbon. Oh gosh, can I backtrack a little bit? Because I remember another dream. Actually, I've got a few more incidents. And one time I'm driving along and this circular shadow goes right across my path when I was driving to and from work. That was weird. This is in the middle of the day, a circular shadow. I looked up, nothing there. It was weird. And now I've forgotten the other one I was just going to talk about. Oh, no, I remember. Because, going up this energy ribbon, I remembered this happening earlier. This beam of light type of thing. I've been pulled up, and it's very energetic. It's like, have you ever been to one of those fairgrounds where you touch the little handle and it gives you a low dose of electricity? It's kind of like that. It's a mild electric shock. And I go up into this craft, and they're letting everyone sit in the pilot seat and basically not so much pilot the craft, but sit in the pilot seat as it's flying along. Like, would you like to take your turn now? I'm like, no, let everyone else go first. I've been here before. I don't mind. So, because you go up and you remember this, but this is all still dreams, right? And so I'm letting everyone go first, and finally it's my turn. I'm last. And they sit me in the front of the crowd, and it's zooming down at below treetop level, through the city, under a bridge. Everything's whipping by fast. It's the coolest thing. And it feels so darn real. And then it's time to go, and everyone's going down this little shaft, this elevator energetic ribbon. And one guy won't do it. He's freaking out. I'm like, listen, it's not hard to do. If you'd like, I'll do it with you. And we did. I took him by the hand, and we went down together, and I went back up, and they took me, and I went back down. A dream, but still different. So now I'm getting back to my experience on May 6th, 2022, where I'm pulled out of a dream, and and I'm dreaming that I see a UFO, and suddenly I see this opening next to me, and I'm drawn into it, and I'm awake. I'm 100% awake. I'm lucid. I'm awake. I don't know how to describe it other than I'm fully awake. And I know what's happening because I recognize this feeling of going up this energetic beam. And it's taken a darn long time. And I'm flying, and I see the Earth recedes into the background, and I'm in outer space now, right? And I'm like, gosh, this is taking a long time. And I'm going, and I'm not coming back. I'm being taken by aliens. I'm ready to live with them.
How are you breathing? Like, are you breathing inside this thing when you're in space?
No. I was not aware of breathing or not breathing, so I'm not really aware of that. That did not cross my mind. I'm just thinking, wow, this has taken a long time. It was 20 or 30 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I knew what was happening. I knew, like, this, they're taking me. I recognize this. I'm awake. This is so cool. And next thing I know, I'm coming up through the bottom. Well, I actually don't remember seeing anything, right? Suddenly I'm inside this thing.
Was this, where were you living at the time? Were you still living in California, or are you in?
Yeah, I was in Reseda, tiny little house, 900 square feet. Loved that house, but it was tiny. But at any rate,
It probably cost $1 million too.
I made more money selling that house than I made in my job in 5 years.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I finally left California.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it was so cool because flying up this thing, and I know what's happening. The next thing I know, I'm laying on a table. I'm like, here we go. And there's short little figures around me whom I'm not really looking at because I'm struck by this taller woman who's wearing a shiny white jumpsuit. She's very thin, and she's not fully human. She's mostly human looking, but she's got enormous blue eyes, very small features, really bright blonde, tightly curled hair, really pretty, and somewhat, not super nurturing, just very clinical, but looking down at me like, are you okay? I said, yes, I'm fine. And I tried to sit up, and they're like, no, 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 don't sit up yet. We need to make sure you're okay. I'm like, I'm fine. I've done this before. I'm okay. Want to get up. And she's looking at me and checking me over, and I'm looking at her and I'm like, yeah, that's a jumpsuit, all right. She's wearing this white jumpsuit. I'm like, this is really cool. So I want to get up and look around, and I can't because there's lights, and they're holding me down. I'm like, listen, I'm fine. I'm telling you I'm fine. And they're like, okay, I guess you're fine. So I hop off the table, which was a tiny little thing, and I don't look back at who's ever there, right? So I'm instantly drawn towards this very tall gray.
Are you dressed in anything? Like, did they put any different clothing on you, or you didn't notice? Okay.
Did not notice. I don't feel like I was in my underwear, but I couldn't tell you. Did not bother to check, because when this is happening to you, you're very much like, wow. I'm like, just absolutely, my eyes are wide, but like, this is actually happening. And I'm instantly drawn to this 7-foot tall female tall gray, who it turns out is Dolly Saffron's main contact, who she calls Mama. Because, later that she had communication, knew about this, right? She knew about this.
So this tall gray, is it the same as the blonde, or is this a different?
No, this is different.
Okay.
That blonde was a hybrid. She was
okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Keep going.
She was definitely. I mean, she had a little nose, little mouth, and well, so did this tall gray, who is a personification of grace and elegance and beauty, really, because she's got these enormous, beautiful eyes that wrap around her head, and a very large, oval-shaped head, and very pale skin. She's wearing kind of a smock. She's tilting her head and looking at me and giving a tiny little curve of a smile. And I walk up to her, and I'm in absolute, heaven. This is so cool. I mean, I am absolutely thrilled. And I walk up to her, and she tilts her head, and she's so graceful and so wise and so loving and just amazing. She's this amazing person. Just to be in her presence is like all you could ever ask for. And she says, so, is this what you thought it would be? Is this what you expected? And I said, no, it's not. This is so much better. This is much better. And she thought that was cute and kind of smiled. I'm like, can I explore? She said, yes, go ahead. So I'm looking around me, and I'm in a big room that's about the size of 50 feet across, 40 feet across, perfectly round, ceilings maybe 10 to 12 feet high, grayish walls, but there's a panel of windows going the entire way around with a little railing around there. And there's some people standing at the railings. There's a group of people lined up in the center. And I'm not really paying attention to this because I want to go look out the window, right? So I go to the far side of the room where there's nobody, and I look out the window. Yep, we're in outer space, and there's the Earth way the heck down there. Like, this is so cool. The floor is very smooth. I feel slightly lighter than normal, but still normal gravity. The air is fine. And so I walk back to the center of the room, and I see these young people standing in a row. 20s. They're in their 20s, right? Mind you, I'm in my 50s. Oh my gosh, I'm the old part up here. This is a little weird. All these people are pretty young, and I'm looking at them, and they're in a daze. And there's people of different ancestors. There's a black guy, there's, Latino, just young people who were dressed. And I walk up to this girl. I'm like, hi, my name's Preston. What's your name? And she's entranced. She cannot speak to me or will not. She's out of it. and so is the other guy. And I'm like, oh gosh, that's a little frustrating. I'd like to speak to them. And my head swivels and I'm looking over towards the far side of the room, and there's two really alien looking guys, which brings my heart up a little bit. I'm like, whoa, those guys do look different.
Mhm.
And then I turn back and there's a lady who is fully conscious. She looks Korean to me, right? She's Asian. Nice young lady. And she's really excited and she's looking out the window. It's like, wow. So I walk over and I'm going to talk to her. And I look out the window. And there's, again, a little railing that you can hold on to. And I look down and the craft drops to the ground in a second. And she goes, woo! And I'm like, whoa. And you can see these little symbols, kind of like on Google Maps, but they're different. They're not words and letters, but there's symbols of some kind that are illuminated. I'm going into more detail here than I've really ever gone before.
No, keep going. This is great. This is great stuff.
So we drop down to the ground and we're
really quick. If we're talking detail, what do these symbols look like? What's the closest human analog? Like hieroglyphics, Sumerian cuneiform, Chinese
Shorthand.
characters? Shorthand?
Greg shorthand. Yeah, little curly cues, circles with dots, and little just symbols that I really wasn't paying so much attention to them, because to see the earth coming down at you that fast is a real shock, because these things can move, but you don't quite realize it until like snap. I mean, you feel like you're going to splat on the ground. I mean, I didn't. I felt absolutely safe, but it came.
Did you feel any gravitational effect?
No.
It was just
no. Like in a weird way, I kind of felt like I should have, and almost kind of just placeboed it a little bit, because you expect to, but no, I didn't. Not at that point. But as soon as it came about 3 to 5 feet above the ground, the craft rocked like this. And I did feel that. And that was so cool, because it was like being on a boat. And you could absolutely feel it. And I almost felt like if I were to jump up and down, I could make this craft move. I didn't try. But I was just like, wow, we're down on the ground. I guess, I should have turned around to see if we were picking someone up, because I suspect that's what was happening.
Really quickly, when you saw these non-humans, when you kind of saw the humans in the daze and then the non-humans across that surprised you, were those non-humans in a daze, or were they kind of part of the crew?
Oh, no, they were guards. They were watching. They were there in case anything went wrong. They were shorter grays, maybe, I think they were. Because Mama is a tall gray, and she's beautiful. I mean, I don't know why, but she just had this exquisite look about her. But they looked real alien to me. And it was a bit of a shock. I'm like, oh, okay. And I actually wanted to go over there. But, my attention was drawn towards this, this Asian woman. And I'm like, maybe I can talk to her because she's conscious. But she was, also just thrilled to death to see this craft come down, stay there for just a moment, and then up we went. And that was equally thrilling. And so now I'm walking back to the center of the room, and I'm wanting this to last longer, because this is basically just, 5 minutes. When Mama, the tall gray, I'll call her Mama. She did not use that name, but Dolly Saffron is completely aware of this incident. She was told it happened. She was told it would happen, and that they were doing this intentionally, not to support her story, but just as for me. And this is part of a number of events I've already gone through, but this time I'm fully conscious. I'm able to, for whatever reason, remember this. And so I walk up to her, and she's got this glass tumbler in her hand, filled with, half filled with this greenish liquid, which is almost fluorescent, but not. It's a bright greenish liquid. And she hands it to me. This is a thick, tiny little tumbler with thick glass. And she hands this to me and indicates that I'm to drink it. I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm a sniffer. I always sniff my food and drinks. And I couldn't really smell much, but I could see it was a thick liquid, like syrup, cough syrup maybe. And it was just a few ounces. And so I took a nice, good gulp of it. And it tasted very subtly of kiwi or lime with a slight sweetness, but very subtle, almost tasteless. But no, there was a taste to it. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And I held the glass up and she took it from me. I'm like, hey, that's mine. Can I have another sip? And she looked at me with absolute surprise, like, really? You want another sip? Like, yes, if that's okay. So that's fine. And so I took another sip of it and snap, I was in bed, awake, fully aware, jumped up, wrote it down, called Dolly. I'm like, you're not going to believe it. She's like, I know about it. And I'm like, what was that liquid? Because I've certainly read about this. Other people have described the same.
Yeah, it's like to put
thing.
you asleep, right?
Well, partially, but she said, no, the real purpose is when you go up on these craft, you get a good dose of gamma radiation. And this is a concoction that they put together to help, the effects of that. So, which was really cool. And that's, kind of probably why they looked at me with surprise. Like, you really want another sip? That was it. And, I thought, could this have been an out-of-body experience? Because I've had a bunch of those, but never like that. And it felt so physical. And talking to Dolly, she's like, no, they took you. This was, something that they agreed to do. And that was your experience. This was for you. And I've never had an out-of-body experience like that, I should say. But I had to consider that possibility because it did take place at night when I was asleep.
What was your take on the people in the daze? Did they describe why those people were there?
No, and I wish I had more time because I would have asked. But I suspect that they were, being taken because they're contactees and are being physically examined or given messages or having their health checked along these lines, but are not at the point where they're fully conscious of it. I don't know. I can only speculate. But I did think it was odd because there was 5 or 10 of them. And I think they were in 2 rows, if I remember correctly. A little table in the center where they brought people in and laid them down. And very comfortable. The whole incident, I did not have one element of fear to it. And I was mad, actually, when I got put back because I was ready to stay. And I really was. And as much as I love my family and life on Earth and what I'm doing, I would have gone with them. It was a really wonderful environment and very friendly, very peaceful, very, free of all the hindrances that we go through on life, with all the money and the licenses and the riots and the smog and everything that, we go through daily just to survive.
Did they talk to you or give you any messages at all?
No, just what I said. That was it. Drink this. What do you think? That was pretty much it. Are you okay? Took a while to convince them to let me off the table. I'm like, listen, I've done this before. I remembered doing this. So I'm like, no, I'm fine. Let me off this table. I've got limited time here. I kind of knew that. And at some level, I'm like, they're going to put me back. And
were they surprised that you woke up or were they expecting you to be awake?
No, there was no surprise that I was awake. They were very attentive. The lady, who I don't know her name, was very attentive, very careful, very making sure that I was okay. And I'm like, listen, I'm fine. It was a very long interdimensional pickup. So it was like, it felt like you're being pulled into a million little pieces. But having had out-of-body experiences, it's somewhat similar to that. And having done this before, I remembered, and it never bothered me. Yeah, it's definitely like an electric shock. But it's not unpleasant. It doesn't even remotely hurt. But it was so cool. And if I had more time to just look down at my clothes and talk to people, and I would have gone over to those ET folks over there and said, hey, dude. But this was a 5-minute experience, if that.
Have you had any experiences since then related to this?
No, that was it.
How would you speculate what was the purpose of that experience?
A gift is how I put it. It was perhaps on some level to validate Dolly's experiences, but I didn't need that because I knew I'd already interviewed her. I'd seen the medical evidence, I'd seen the photographs, I've talked to corroborating witnesses. So I did not need that to know that she's for real. But that could have been part of it. I think ultimately it was really just like, thanks for working with us. You've done a really good job. Because I feel like it is something I chose to do and was asked by them to do, is to write these books and do what I can to educate people about this subject, to the extent that they're here and they're not here to harm us. It's quite the opposite. So I think they're really pleased with how I've been able to just do my research in a very fact-based, not pushing a certain narrative method, which is, really, I try so hard to do that because you have to sift through a lot of nonsense and disinformation. And people are scared to death who are having these experiences. A lot of them are very afraid, even though they're not being hurt, even remotely. They're being healed often, still scared. So that's, a tough row to hoe, so to speak. But I feel like they really are pleased with how I've been able to do it, and that is something I chose to do, and that is something they asked me to do very early on. Because looking back in my past, I did have a dream once of running out into my backyard when I was a kid, and right after I'd found out UFOs were real, so I'm not a kid, but 21, 22 years old, running out into my backyard and seeing a gray. And I was telling Whitley Strieber this. He's like, Preston, that's probably a real experience. I'm like, well, maybe it was. But I ran up to this gray and it was short. And I'm like, wow, look at you. You're a tiny little thing, much skinnier than I thought, much more frail than, because you get a certain idea in your head of what it would be like to have an experience. And then it happens and you're like, well, this is not quite what I expected. So yeah, I am prepared now to call myself a contactee. I don't really go there because I feel like I'm much more, useful, I guess, to just be an objective researcher. But objectivity goes out the window when you start doing this work. And I think it was Margaret Mead who said you can actually learn a lot more by going and living with the people and becoming a participant. And that's where you get the truth of it. Because there's a lot of researchers out there who's never had an experience. And they're putting forth all these theories. Like, it's not ET. I'm like, well, hold on a second. Have you ever been taken on board? You might change your mind. Because once you have this experience, it's unequivocally real, and you know it. I think they're ETs. I've had the experience. You can tell me you can speculate all you want, but I know what I know. Because I've got experiential knowledge, and I've moved beyond belief to true knowledge that cannot be taken away from me. So, that's the way I feel. And I absolutely respect contactees when I talk to them because, they're experienced. And if they interpret it a certain way, it's not my job to pull them out of their interpretation. It's my job to make sure they're okay, report their experience accurately. Those are my two objectives. Be accurate and help them in any way I can.
Any final words for the audience?
Yeah, I would say UFOs are real. We're not alone in this universe. It's incredibly anthropocentric to think that this is something that is revolving around us. It's not. But there are people out there who look upon us as children. There are progenitors, family, friends, brothers, sisters, this sort of thing. They're not here to hurt, harm, scare, take over. It's not a nefarious phenomena. Don't look to our government for answers on this, or the secret government, or the military-industrial complex, or the intelligence agencies, because they're lying, demonstrably lying. Don't buy into the fear-based narrative. If you want to know the truth about contact, do your homework. Talk to contactees. You can reach out yourself and have contact. Telepathically would be the way to do it. Mentally, through consciousness, that's the way to reach out to them. Meditate, meditate, meditate. Develop your psychic abilities. But yeah, move away from fear. Let love and truth guide your actions. Everyone on this planet is known by them. So if you want to have contact, you can. And yeah, I think it's all real good news for us ultimately. But I appreciate you letting me talk about my own experiences because I don't do it often. It's a little unnerving, I have to say, because I know there are skeptics out there who are going to be like, this guy's lost his mind. But so be it. I don't care. This happened to me. They can think what they want.
Don't mind the haters. Only you can, describe what happened to you. And it's impossible for them to confirm or deny it, right? Right. They can try to deny it, but that also requires the burden of proof, which they don't have. So that's the way I look at it. You can say whatever you want, but unless you were there or witnessed it, you don't get a vote. You don't, outside observers will never know, but you know. So I think that's the difficulty between knowledge and belief, right? A lot of people in our society are just operating off of belief, but true knowledge is derived from experiential, situations. So I believe you, right? Because what happened to you seemed very real, and you're one of the most honest people I know, of the highest integrity. So I appreciate you sharing that, despite I know it made you a little uncomfortable. So, but I will do my best to honor it.
Hey, I appreciate it. Yeah. Believe it or not, I'm kind of a shy guy. I never in a million years thought I would be doing something like this. So, yeah, it's got its challenges, but it sure is interesting. I'm having a lot of fun. So,
all right.
I appreciate it. You got it.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.